Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. Follow us on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook, SWGM Podcast. Throw us a buck on Patreon, patreon.com/SWGM Podcast. And also on YouTube. Like, subscribe, share. YouTube channel is Savage Worlds GM Podcast, and the same moniker on iTunes, Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Tonight's topic, will it savage? We want to talk about adapting pop culture properties and other features in the Savage Worlds and how you go about doing that. Here to discuss it, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello.
Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Hey, Jared, if you push that button, we go live.
We do go live, and it stays live for 8 hours. No shit. Holy crap. And Dustin, the Savage Intern. Hashtag penis at AOE.
I'd like to point out, I'd like to point out I do not have 8 hours this evening.
Right. It just lets me know that it's going to be on the air for up to 8 hours.
Okay, good.
Gosh, I'm so glad you used hours. I was getting nervous.
And if you're watching the live stream of the broadcast on the YouTube channel, feel free to participate in the chat. One quick note, though, all devices off per Savage Mommy. Put all those tablets and everything down.
Since we know it's going to be live for 8 hours, and we know that Dustin is tossing out penis AOE, what happened to penis AOE last 8 hours? Do you need to consult a physician?
No, you need to consult a necromancer.
No, at that point, you just need a trophy because you're the man.
I also have a question. Did anyone pay attention to your show last week since I wasn't here? They were probably all on their phones, all on their tablets.
Right.
They probably didn't pay a bit of attention.
All we saw were the tops of everybody's heads.
They were so sucked in by their mobile devices, they didn't even tune in. We had
No, actually, what happened, it was very meta. They were watching the show on their tablet.
Yeah. All right.
Very, very meta.
See, I'm okay if they're using their tablet for watching the show or actual gaming purposes. Right. Well, the game you're playing, I should say.
Right. They got it. They had a wicked dice roller app, just fucking wicked.
Yeah, so they can cheat.
Right. So let's talk the topic. Let's get the train on the tracks.
I miss you guys for a week.
So tonight we're talking topic, will it savage? That's a nice broad topic. The answer to all questions about will it savage, 99% yes.
Mm-hmm. Most of the time.
So I guess my first question is, apart from obviously the mental gymnastics that we're all going to go through tonight on the show, I think the first thing everyone needs to realize, you can run any setting, any genre with core rules without making any changes.
Right.
Yes.
If you rely more heavily on your narrative storytelling as a GM, you can capture any theme regardless of what it is with the core rules. Yeah, setting rules help, and coming up with nifty little things that you've tweaked or twisted for new hindrances, new edges, etc. are interesting, but you really can run anything with just the core rules.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's worth mentioning, that you don't need to start getting fancy with setting rules and reinventing the wheel as far as equipment tables and all that. You can just pick up the deluxe edition and just run it. Good point. So, but let's talk about, because it's always the new shiny. What's the new shiny? What's the new Netflix thing? What's the newest? Oh my God! I remember back in the day we used to play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles by Palladium. Oh, I know Savage Worlds came out with Rifts. When are they going to release other Palladium properties? Great news! You don't have to wait. You basically go ahead and just take those properties and the IPs and translate them, adapt them to Savage Worlds. Now, we want to say adapt because if you're new to Savage Worlds really doesn't do conversion. What Savage Worlds does is allows you to adapt the framework of the story, capture those key elements of the storytelling for that particular setting or property, and run it.
Boy, do I know that, because when I first started playing Savage Worlds, I've told this story before. I was moving over a D&D campaign in Dungeon Magazine. It was dragon base. I don't even remember the name of it now. And I kept asking Clint, and I kept asking on the forums, well, how do I convert this? How do I convert this? And they just kept telling you, don't convert. You want the feeling of the thing. Because I kept saying, well, how do I convert my players' characters to Savage Worlds? And they're like, you don't.
Clint has become a little softer in the way he words it lately, but it's the same message that it was 12 years ago. Don't convert anything. Adapt it. Bring the flavor and leave the rules.
Right. Because they're different. They're not it's not the same type of rule set. You're not gonna get the same feel from a D&D game, and at the time it was 3.5. That you're gonna get from Savage Worlds. You're not gonna get that same rule feel. And thank God you don't want to.
I was gonna say, if you wanted that feel, you'd still be playing the other game.
Exactly.
That is one of those. It's the conversation that comes up quite a bit when the conversion topic comes up. Is people will say, "Well, if you want to play that, go play it in that system." And you always get the people who jump out and go, "Well, no, we don't want to push anybody away from Savage." It's not that I'm pushing anybody away from Savage Worlds. When you want to play Savage Worlds, I'm more than happy to help you come up with a way to play Savage Worlds. But when what you want to do is play Battleship, don't try to convert all the rules from Battleship to Savage Worlds. Go play Battleship and then come back and play Savage Worlds later when you're ready to play Savage Worlds. You can enjoy multiple games, and there's no reason to try to shoehorn everything in by making these convoluted, twisting rule conversions.
No, I only eat Taco Bell, and I want every fast food restaurant to be Taco Bell. When I go to Burger King, when I go to Burger King, I want burritos. And I get upset if they don't have them on the menu.
I mean, they have them at McDonald's now all day.
Right. They've had them for years.
That's why I go to Carl's Jr., because they also have green burritos for anybody on the West Coast. Go ahead, Dustin.
So I was going to say, one of the things, and I've actually gotten into some discussions with some of the D20 players, and we go round and round about this. But one of the things that keeps coming up is power levels. And so they were like, no, I can't do this in Savage Worlds. I can't do that in Savage Worlds. I'm like, okay, I'll tell you what. Here is the Superpowers Companion. Take a look at this. And so they break it open and they look at the superpowers, and then all of a sudden the light bulb goes off. If your problem with Savage Worlds is you can't savage it because you can't find the right power level, you need the Superpowers Companion. Like a minute ago, Jared, when you mentioned Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Palladium, the base characters for the Palladium Megaverse can be created using the Superpowers Companion at 4-color level.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Now, in regard to that as well, you could achieve the same thing by using the standard powers. Like you could, well, I don't know about the same thing, but you can do Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with arcane background superpowers from the core rule as well.
I want to throw something out there for some people. All right. If you go and you look into the Matrix, all right, you can absolutely do that. And I'll let you try this out for anybody who wants to give it a try. Make it a deluxe core standard character. Make them at legendary level, because legendary is your base for your 4-color superheroes.
Yeah, you can do that as well. You can start off at different levels. Now, I mean, but let's break it down. Let's really break Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles down. It's martial artists.
Right. Also, Savage Karate Kid. Thanks, Ruben.
We are no longer taking questions from Ruben. Just no, I think that Jared's actually onto something here. Is you look at some of these things, you can break them down to a single skill is all you need for that particular thing. But Ghostbusters, those proton packs, I don't need a specialty skill. It's shooting.
Yep.
The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I don't need even the arcane background treatment they did in Deadlands. It's fighting. Maybe some athletics thrown in now that athletics is going to cover grappling. You can pick a genre, pick a pop culture property. G.I. Joe. I know there's a big one coming out right now from Sean Patrick Fannin. He's doing a Freedom Squad or whatever, and it's a G.I. Joe, red laser, blue laser thing. It's all about the combat fighting skills and the shooting skills for the guys firing laser guns. I mean, you can add other stuff on top of it, sure, but the first thing you have to do is drill deep and go, what is the core thing that the players are going to do in that setting? And if it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it's going to be fighting. Right. Yeah, you might have somebody take Bolt and trap it as shurikens, but they're going to be fighting on almost every encounter.
Right, and here's the thing too. The great thing about Savage Worlds, if you want it, you don't have to go too deep down the rabbit hole. Even using core rules, if you wanted to create the mutant turtle race, there's no need to. Just give them all +1 armor for the shell naturally, and call them human characters. Use the human character build, and just say, "Hey, they're mutated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're walking turtles. They have green skin. They eat pizza. They walk around. They're turtles."
All turtles start with a shield on their back. There's actually a rule in Savage Worlds for carrying your shield on your back.
Yep. Yeah, and we're going to eventually get to this topic, and we'll dive a little bit deeper in, but the key thing to remember and to absorb and take into this, if you're going to adapt anything to Savage Worlds, is you have to embrace the concept of trappings.
Right.
And you have to understand, well, in mechanical terms, what's different between a human martial artist and a mutant ninja turtle martial artist? Nothing. Really, at the end of the day, stat-wise, there's no difference. One looks like a turtle, one doesn't. And Savage Worlds doesn't really care what your game looks like. All it cares about is the impact that has on the rules. If that has the impact on the rules, by all means, then build a mechanic into it.
Yep. And most of the things, so you got to think of, I think that's one of the issues that I've run into when I discuss this with people who really like the more popular settings, is that they want a setting book and a rule book together, and they don't like the idea of having a universal system. And I look at it and I go, are you kidding me? This is like a multi-tool. I can do so many things with Savage Worlds because it's a universal system. I don't have to make so many conversions. I don't have to stick to one setting.
It's almost like there's not so many restrictions.
Yes, and that's the thing. Like, some people need restrictions. Some people absolutely need them, because every time you introduce another option, it takes people 4 times as long to make a distinct conclusion.
Well, I think there's an interesting thing to say, that obviously there's the whole, the person who needs lined paper, the person who needs blank paper, they have to have that constraint to work within. But I think there's also an interesting thing to say here, in that D&D is a neutral system. There are multiple D&D settings, some of which occur in outer space. Spelljammer is a thing, and it uses the same set of rules that Forgotten Realms or any Planescape or any of the other D&D settings use. The same is true of Dungeon World. It's fairly run the exact same way, regardless of whether you're playing Dungeon World or Apocalypse World. That system runs kind of the exact same way. Fate is very obviously a generic system. GURPS has generic in the goddamn name. You can't point to that and go, this is why no one likes Savage Worlds for me, because the entire hobby is based on a lot of these systems that have come along that have had multiple settings you can play them in. Right. That's where that entire conversation kind of falls apart for me. I think that's again, that person who needs that lined paper, that constraint, reaching for something they can say to express the problem they're actually having.
Right, and I think one of the things that a lot of people who come from another role-playing system into Savage Worlds don't understand is the core concept, the core design philosophy behind Savage Worlds is, details. We don't care. Granular? No, fighting. We have one skill, and it's called fighting. If that's a flying roundhouse kick martial artist style, Fine, roll fighting. Here's how fighting works. Bare knuckle, doesn't matter. I don't care what you're doing. You're hitting somebody with a baseball bat. It's all fighting. A very broad skill base for the most part. And I know some people are going to get a little bit nitpicky and go, well, you got very specific skills like lockpicking. And yes, you do.
Not anymore. Yeah, thievery.
Not anymore. That shit got rolled in.
And I'm glad. I think thievery and athletics are great additions. I'm just waiting for them to roll in piloting and riding, piloting and driving.
What, in a vehicle operation?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you could absolutely do that. But the thing is, if you're looking for granularity in your rule mechanics, Savage Worlds probably ain't for you. It's probably not going to feed that need. However, the nice part about it is, once you drink the Kool-Aid, once you
can.
You can bring it down granular if you want, but at some point, does it cease to be Savage Worlds?
So there is a setting rule called skill specialization, where if you want to noodle those skills into finite little bits, you can absolutely do it.
I'm going to correct you on that one, Dustin, for a bit. So the skill specialization rule, you're still taking shooting. Mm-hmm. Now you're just giving it a focus.
Right.
Rifles, shooting pistols, shooting bows and arrows.
Which is the whole essence and nature of those very specific skills. It makes sense that knowing how to operate a pistol and a rifle has some carryover. It really does. It's just having a specialization that you're good in sort of makes sense.
So, Dave, let's for any newbies watching, let's go ahead and dive a little deep into skill specialization setting rule in Savage Worlds, the impact that it has. So, correct me if I'm wrong, with you being the rules maven, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of skill specialization is as follows. If you want to have skill specialization, when you take fighting, and then let's not use fighting as an example. It's probably not a good example. Shooting. I take shooting as a basic skill. It's 1 point per die type up to the linked attribute. When I take shooting pistols, what impact does that have on the cost of the skill and how it's used in the game?
So this is where I have to admit, even as the rules maven, it's one I don't know as well because I don't use it often. I do know there is a difference. I just don't know the mechanical, value difference between the two. In use, I know that if you don't have the skill that you need, like you need the rifle skill and you only have pistols or you only have shooting, you take a -2 to that action, but you use that base skill.
Right. Yeah, you do.
So there's absolutely, to me, that's kind of where it falls apart a little bit in getting as granular as people say they want. Because it's not, if I didn't take pistols, I can't use a pistol well at all. It's, if I didn't take pistols but I took rifles, I can shoot my pistol with a -2 penalty. And again, this is one of those rules you'll have to go to the core rules and look it up for yourself, or somebody who's actually pulling it up can read it out.
It's on page 95.
The mathematical difference in character creation isn't as important to you as a GM as the effect it's going to have on your game is if they didn't buy the right skill, whether it's they bought biology and you need them to make a physics roll. They bought lockpicking and you need them to make a trap disarm. Whatever it is that you're using for your granular skills, when they try to do that thing, they're going to be making the roll of a penalty for not having the specific skill.
Right, that's what it is. It says a character uses his normal skill for one device of choice. When using any other variation, he suffers a -2 penalty.
Right. And it costs more during character creation to buy these new skill specializations. It's considered raising an attribute.
Yeah, and then gaining an additional specialization counts as raising a skill below its linked attribute.
Right.
And again, though, I think the core aspect of it is I don't think skill specialization adds that granularity people are talking about.
Okay.
I don't think it does either.
I think it absolutely is there, and I'm not saying that you're wrong or doing it bad if you use it, but don't expect it to replicate something like GURPS just because you add in that setting rule. It's not going to capture that granularity that you might be looking for.
Right. Okay. No, I can concede that. I'm not opposed to what you're saying. I'm just saying that the nature of that -2, when you use all of the other sort of environmental hazards, like if you have low light, dim light, if it's dark, if they're behind cover, there's a gang up bonus on you. Then those negatives really do start to stack up, and you really do when you're using the hazards and the rules like you should, and you have skill specialization, it becomes a nightmare.
Yeah, it basically turns anything you don't have into basically the unskilled penalty. A -2 unskilled penalty basically is the idea behind it. And I've seen some settings try to use it and play with it and decide against it. I think probably one of the most deep dive granular settings, and this is probably one of the reasons I'm not a fan of this setting, is because it tries to be way too granular, way too detailed, and way too simulationist, is Interface Zero. And Interface Zero on the forums, when they were talking about doing version 2, there was a lot of discussion back and forth about using skill specializations heavily. And even they decided against it, from what I remember, when it actually came out.
So just something I want to point out real quick is also dealing with the modifiers, where Dustin's saying that -2 is a big thing. Remember that in the book itself, it actually defines, and I think this is on page 70 in the game rules section, where it talks about trait tests, that a simple task, something that's very easy to do, like seeing where someone walked in deep snow or mud, is a +2 to the roll, whereas trying to track them during a sluicing rainstorm where there's fog and there's rain in your eyes and it's dark outside is a -4. That a very difficult task comes up to about a -4. That a difficult task might be at a -2. You have to have that idea of how much an impact those penalties are going to have to use that appropriately, and also to determine whether that -2 is, something you want to have in your game, because you don't necessarily want to set your players up where every time they're trying to do something, they're constantly feeling that it's an uphill battle to do everything. That's one of the reasons I stay away from that setting rules. I get the sense from my players that it takes a system where I'm already going to apply lighting rules and obscurement rules and stuff like that, and makes it even more difficult to accomplish anything with a dice roll.
Right. Well, and also too, depending on what you're adapting, now you might throw the negative modifiers out in certain situations completely, or not even call for a roll. We're playing a high flying cosmic superheroes. Oh, you're gonna hail a taxi? I don't know. Give me a notice roll. Really? That's not the style of game we're playing. Oh, you're gonna try to catch a falling building and put it back in place while you're flying. Okay, now we're gonna talk about a skill roll with some possible negatives, because that's germane to what you're doing in the setting.
And there is a comment here in chat that I want to touch on before we move on with this. And from Sunset Sam, he says 90% of skills in RPGs seldom get used, if ever. And I'm going to just simply say that's the GM's fault. The system is not written poorly. The GMs and the communities have made the decision to avoid those skills and those rules. The reason that you don't ever see players really truly dedicate building a character around knowledge skills is because GMs aren't calling for them at the table. The reason you don't see players building around the social skills other than intimidation or taunt is because they're not being called for every time their character has those interactions where they want to haggle or they want to talk somebody into something. Where we keep relying too heavily on the role play aspect and forgetting that there's supposed to be a game underneath it, and that we're saying these skills don't matter when we don't call for those dice rolls.
Right. I think probably the most underutilized skill in the entire game is investigation.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, hey, I want to go do some research on this one. Okay, give me an investigation skill. A what? I don't have that skill.
Well,
Or
and
even calling for an investigation skill if you're
and,
in the library looking something up.
and I think investigation, people don't understand the use of it because people want to use it when you should be making notice rolls. I want to look around the room and see if I find anything. So I'm going to roll investigation. And I think it's a skill that the name of it kind of, I don't know, the best way to put it might confuse people, or people think that it's something that it's not. And I see that all the time, especially in con games, and I still see it from players that I play with. They're like wanting to use investigation, then you have to explain to them, well, investigation is libraries, the internet, books, things like that. It's not your environment.
That's one of the things I think is that they look at it and they think investigation, oh, I'm going to be a detective, but what you're thinking of, if you're going to look for clues, is not investigation, it's notice. That's why the investigator edge gives you +2 to investigation, streetwise, and notice. It is literally the edge to help you be the flatfoot, because you need those 3 skills to actually go through the books, to talk to the people in the neighborhood, and to spot things.
I think this is one of those things that we've covered on the show before, though. It's a case of people taking things too literally, and we've talked about this, pretty extensively. Is that you read it in the book and it says investigation, and they take it to literally mean the act of doing an investigation, and that it's going to be all the stuff that goes into it. And the problem, I personally think, is they're so used to other games where everything's so drilled down and narrow that when it says you use this for investigation, it literally is used for searching for clues and nothing else. You can't search for treasure or traps with it. You can only search for clues. And then they get to Savage Worlds, and investigation is about searching intellectually online through resources, through books, etc. Looking at a map and figuring out the best route, things like that are all done through investigation. So I think understanding how those skills get used is also a pretty germane thing to being able to do this savage it aspect. Because if you don't know that riding is supposed to handle things like, keeping a horse from bucking, then you don't know that then covers a lot of animal husbandry style stuff. So if you're doing a game, if you're trying to savage something that's dealing with a lot of horsemanship, you don't know to call for riding rolls in some of those situations. The player's not actually riding the horse at the time. They're trying to break the horse, or whatever the case may be.
Right, and then this also goes on the riding thing as well. This also means that you have to understand how to adapt skill meanings and purposes to the game world as well. So if you've got, just because you're in a modern setting where nobody's ever going to see a horse, doesn't mean that you eliminate riding as a skill, because it could be based on riding a bicycle, hang gliding,
motorcycle,
anything that requires balance. You could say, hey, that requires riding. So you could say, hey, doing a skateboard, give me a riding roll to do the skateboard trick.
And the reverse is true, and we see that in situations like the Deadlands write-ups, where we see driving is used to drive the wagon, even though it's still a group of horses that you're ostensibly controlling. You're not making a riding roll there, because they've decided to break that out and reuse that skill to make those 2 separate things that you have to pay for equally on your character.
Right. And so if you're, one of the things we're on the topic of skills, understand the weight of the skills. If you're adapting something, it's totally within your scope of responsibility as a GM, adapting it to say, we don't need writing. We don't need this skill. We don't need that skill. But you have to understand what those skills do, how they're intended to be used, and then make that decision intellectually.
Right, and know that that's okay, because aren't there some settings out there that do get rid of some certain skills?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's something that happens. So don't feel like you're bound to that skill list. And I would say, even, you take some thought, think about it, but maybe even if you wanted to add a skill, spend some time, think about it, think if there's another skill that can do it, but also, certainly if you're going to take some skills away and you think that you need to add some skills,
Right.
Don't go overboard. You don't need to get crazy and add 20 new skills, because then you're not really paying attention to what the current skills already do.
Right. And let's say, for example, I'm going to give you a great example for something that someone published setting where they created a brand new skill category based on the setting alone, and that's Deadlands Noir. With it being big, easy, you have the possibility of playing the sultry songbird or a jazz musician. It's going to be a very basic concept in that game. They not only went, well, let's find a way for people who want to play those characters and musicians to actually have a skill when it doesn't really exist in Savage Worlds. They said, we're just going to basically take the same concept as knowledge and say it's perform, and then define a focus. Are you singing? Is it perform singing, playing, perform guitar, piano, whatever? And then let's build an edge that allows us people to make a few ducats and make some money off of that, doing it, and a system for it. And that's a perfect iteration of like, okay, what am I adapting? What's important in this setting? Is there a skill that's not in the core rules that I kind of need to bring in? And if the answer is yes, then perform is a great example of that. So much to the point that's come across, I believe, in the Flash Gordon
it has.
Black settings, right?
It has, and it'll probably be in black, I would guess.
Right, and if you want to have more of a classical bard, you could make their arcane skill perform lute.
That'd be a great idea.
In the Fantasy Companion under the Troubadour section.
Yeah.
So with that said, I mean, who has a recent pop culture thing that we haven't talked about on the show before that they want to try to pitch out here in Savage? Because here's the thing, we constantly do the Can It Be Savage, and we talk about the Matrix, or we talk about Star Wars, or we talk about the big label stuff, but what's something else?
You know what? Why don't we turn that one over to the people in chat?
Well, I think Chris has one for us to discuss while we wait for chat.
Well, this is just my buddy Tim got this comic book. It's an old 80s comic book called Swords of the Swashbucklers. It's pirates in space, which has kind of already been done, but he immediately, because this is what Tim does, was like, oh, we could certainly savage that.
Here is exactly how I would savage that, and I literally am not sucking up or anything. I would buy Chris's
Through Hell and High Water.
Through Hell and High Water, and then I would narratively call things space names and throw a lot of sci-fi jargon on it, and just as is.
That would work.
You could do the same thing with Pirates of the Spanish Main. You could do the same thing with 50 Fathoms. But personally, I'm one of those that I almost hate to say this, but Buccaneer Through Hell and High Water is written for the current set of rules. The others aren't. So unless you're very familiar with the game, it's a little harder to go back and reference things like Spanish Main and 50 Fathoms.
Right.
Well, while the viewers come up with an idea, put it in chat. Dustin, you put a comment in here from Russ. You want to tackle that one real quick?
Sure thing. What about constant win, no fear of loss? In reference to setting rule or how to get that feeling, I would say gritty damage, insanity.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree, but I would say I would fall back into the same camp that Dave was bringing up to you earlier. Use all the rules.
Yeah.
Just use all the rules.
So something we hear a lot is they'll drop a Benny and they can overcome anything, or it's a simple 4 to do shooting, so they're always going to take shooting over fighting, etc. If you start putting in cover mechanics and lighting penalties and unstable platforms, and your character is not familiar with the OS, so you're going to take a subjective penalty enforced by the GM rather than something that's in the rule book. Because again, remember, as the GM, you have that purview to go, okay, so you're trying to land an airplane and you don't have any piloting skill, and now you've decided you want to land the airplane on the pitching deck of an aircraft carrier in the middle of the storm. Well, not only am I going to tell you have to make an unskilled piloting check to do so, but I'm then going to apply additional penalties for the fact that you're landing on the deck of a ship and then that the deck of the ship is moving. These are two separate penalties because you have less space to do it on, and that space you have is a moving target now. So I think once you start looking at things like that, you start finding out, oh, well, to land a plane might be a -4, but to land a plane on the deck of an aircraft carrier in pitching seas, you might be looking at a -10 or higher, and then it's an unskilled roll, which pushes it even further. That's where you really start seeing just how much fail can exist in Savage Worlds. And when you crash an airplane into an aircraft carrier, that's all the fail. There's no surviving this. That is, you just blew up yourself and anyone in the plane and did damage to the aircraft carrier. You kamikazed it. There weren't that many kamikaze pilots that survived the crash. Just saying.
Right. I was about to add on, make sure the consequences, make sure the punishment fits the crime, so to speak. If you're going to try to do this thing, realize if you fail, you're dead. We're not going to be rolling up, well, what was the damage and letting you soak wound. No. You fail to land this on the deck. Boom, kaboom, good night, nurse. Roll up a new character.
Yeah. When you start applying the appropriate consequences, all the rules, and you narratively start describing things, you can absolutely capture a challenging thing where even if the characters aren't really in danger, you've narrated it in such a way the player thinks the character's in danger, and you've got a whole table of swamp ass that you're now narrating to as they're more nervous than they need to be, and in the back of your head that this is a simple task, but you've set it up to be a very dramatic moment at the table so they can get a big win. Or you could set it up to seem easy and it's really a difficult thing, and that's going to ratchet up the drama later on in the session. You can do a lot of that just by how you apply the rules and how you apply your game.
So I was looking to see, I actually like Ruben's kind of serious one. I think he's talking about the show Vikings on History Channel.
That's okay. So let's talk about doing Vikings, the History Channel show. So what are the main points of that show? What are the themes they're trying to present?
Sailing,
what is the world?
Sailing, rape, and pillage.
There is a Viking adventure in the deluxe core book.
Okay, but we're talking
section.
Right, there is, but we're talking about adapting Vikings to TV shows. So let's talk about that.
I've never seen the show.
So let's talk about that approach. For anybody who's seen it, it is more than anything else about characters trying to obtain power and prestige over one another. I would say that's the core conceit of that story. It just happens to be taking place in a Viking setting with, sailing ships and getting, finding a way to get to another shore and robbing monasteries and doing all that is just so much plot device for the main idea that the character is trying to become basically uber powerful Lord of the Vikings, undisputed king of all. But there are some tone and theme to that. When you look at it, everything's very dark. When you look at the setting, when you watch that movie or watch that TV series, everything's dark. There's a lot of machinations and political intrigue happening in that game. Guess what? All Savage Worlds, social conflicts, it's already in there. There's really nothing to do other than just run with the core rules.
You know what else there is in that quite a bit? Knowledge religion.
Yeah.
There's a lot of my religion versus your religion philosophical discussion that takes place, and some of those social conflicts that Jared's talking about are going to be calling heavily on knowledge Christianity, knowledge Norse mythology, etc.
Yeah. The language is going to play a big role in that, right? So if you're adapting that setting, knowledge, I guess you would say what? Norse? Is it what
Norse.
What Viking Norse? Okay. So knowledge Norse, knowledge English, knowledge Latin, knowledge and actually use the knowledge rules from Savage Worlds about the die type rating. To when they're trying to communicate with each other, that should be a big part of it. I would say all Vikings outside of their culture are outsiders. Just automatically, everybody mistrusts them because they're violent savages. as far as they're concerned. So every Viking has the outsider hindrance with any other culture.
I wanna throw something out.
Boating's going to be big too.
Boating is going to be big. And cold, like environmental hazards, the cold. That is the most dangerous thing about the Norse. So the culture is the Norse culture, which is a warrior-based culture. So they should have death wish. They have to die in battle in order to go to heaven.
Yeah.
A Viking is a warrior. Like to go Viking is to go to take. I would honestly say that a lot of the actual Norsemen, and they got a bad rap because they took it violently, but they had to. They were going to starve if they did not pillage. They were free. They were freezing to death, and a brutal warrior class came up around that. We could do without the raping and the pillage, but they needed the food.
You could argue that there was plenty of fish in the sea.
Well, I was going to say we're generalizing a lot about history
based on a TV show.
TV show, I can definitely agree. We've got a basis for a setting. If you, and this is one of those things I will be very quick to caution on. When you start savaging something like this, don't try to make it reality.
Yeah.
Right.
Think about what were the Vikings really like.
Right. It's a game.
Yeah. Think, what are the Vikings like in the show we're trying to emulate?
Right.
What are the Viking tropes that I want to have come through the game, and what's going to be fun, and throw out the parts that are just not going to be interesting, like the 3 months a year where they literally hold up in a hovel and do nothing.
Right.
Right.
You know, because everything outside is under 4 foot of snow, and it's just not worth going outside at that point.
Right. And I don't know if you guys have watched
hoveling.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have watched Vikings, for example, but there's a lot. And Dave's right. There's a lot of the story focuses on morality.
Yeah.
Like, well, wait a minute. I understand it's your tradition to human sacrifice to the Norse gods. It's a thing. Is it moral? Should we be doing this?
You had to, like, once per year, you had to hang someone on a tree as an offering to Odin. Like,
and that's put into the show where they're actually debating.
That's part of the culture.
Themselves. Yeah.
Like, you had to hang someone for the Allfather. Yeah, no.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm saying that could actually, like, it's a religion for some people. I don't know if you want to get into it, but that could potentially be a one-shot or a plot point campaign or one of the issues. And likewise, you will get into conflicts because that's how they settle disputes, is through duels. You had 3 shields, and you either broke all 3 of those shields or you killed the guy.
Little gladiatorial. I like. I want to talk to Cy. I think Cy's got a good idea. The Percy Jackson book series. To savage that. So, my son is way into the Percy Jackson book series. I get it's kind of like from what I understand, it's basically Harry Potter with a lot of Greek overtones.
It's the Greek gods, and the kids in it are basically the children of Greek gods.
Yeah.
Spoilers. Sorry, spoilers.
I'm sorry. So it's Olympus Incorporated.
Yeah, it is kind of Olympus Inc. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you want to know how to savage that, there's a published setting that actually savaged it.
Well, and we were kind of talking about this earlier, right? It's just so much trappings.
Yeah.
Really, when you break it down. Well, what makes a wild card? Oh, well, they're part demigod. That's why they're wild cards. Do I need to do anything else to make them special? No. Maybe automatically give them arcane background and a power based on whoever their deistic parentage comes from. If it's Zeus, you've got basically bolt for lightning. If you're Poseidon, maybe you have entangle, but it applies towards the sea, towards water. I'm just kind of just like
well, and I think there's
thinking out loud.
There's an interesting thing we can touch on here that's a big part of that too, is set the scale of your game based on the genre and the theme that you're trying to capture. So if all of the wild cards in the game are demigods,
Yeah.
then a D6 strength is enough for them to pick up and throw a card. They still have to roll the D6 and get a success to pick it up and hurl it, but it's enough strength for them to do that. And a D12 strength might be enough for them to pick up and throw a building, but they still have to make the roll and roll above the 4. You can say the scale of what you can accomplish is increased without changing any of the base mechanic that goes under it. And that's where, I always say that the Superpowers Companion gets something wrong, because it does all this inflation. It adds a bunch of numbers where it should have just increased the scale of what was achieved by those lower numbers to keep the game a little faster and a little more tight running. But I think that's one of those things that gets lost very quickly is, what differentiates a character in your game world? Well, in Game of Thrones, more than likely, everyone who's a wild card is a member of a noble house. They may not necessarily be a recognized member. They might be a bastard son who's been shipped off or something, but they all are a noble house, and they get a deferential treatment from every peasant in the land. No one crosses them because, well, that's the second son of Lord Earl Montalban's, penis wrangler. Therefore, we can't say anything negative to him, or they'll come riding through and burn us out. You give him whatever he wants. So automatically, persuasion has a much bigger scale with the average extra for that character, just because that's the genre and theme you're playing in.
Right. So the base reaction for all peasants to a wild card may be friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you just roll from there. If you're talking about superpower, like super strength, the easy way for you to do that, like Dave was saying, is if you're looking for some kind of guide, you just go look at the load limits and say, oh no, the base load limit is now 500 pounds, and then start building from there using that same tool. No, I agree. If I'm remembering correctly, one of the extras in Percy Jackson is a satyr.
Yep.
But he ends up walking on, in the real world, in the modern world, they're disguised, so he's walking around with looks like he's like disabled. He has like polio crutches. Okay, that could just be illusion. The character naturally has the disguise power or the illusion power automatically. So yeah, I mean, it's so much of this is going to come down to trappings.
Yep.
What's important? Trappings.
One of the things, like if you have like mystical or magical characters, is you might want to consider a setting rule to be facade. And facade would be that normal human beings don't see it, but anybody with an arcane background or an arcane heritage would be able to see it.
Right. Or you could even apply the rules for the invisibility as if they were fully invisible as far as how you go about noticing it.
Yeah, so, -6.
Yeah. And that's for somebody who knows that there are immortals walking around us and they're disguised, and I'm on the lookout for them. So in order to detect them, I have to roll against a -6.
Active and passive guards.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a rule we never really consider. You have active and passive sentries. So, yeah, look into that, GMs.
Yeah, that's kind of important. It can be important.
Yeah, because, I mean, like, so in the Bethesda games, you can shoot somebody in the head with an arrow and it doesn't kill them. And then eventually they're like, must be nothing. Arrow still sticking out the back of their head. I don't know. The brain damage just destroyed their attention span. But for Savage Worlds, like, the GM probably shouldn't do that. That sentry should go from passive to active, and he should probably be blowing some whistles.
No. He should go from passive to hostile. Be ringing an alarm. I mean, let's all be honest here. He's not going to go searching for you by himself. When you just shot him in the head, he's going to call all his buddies to search for you, and he's going to head to the infirmary to have the arrow removed from his helmet.
Hey, Bill. Maybe you should go see the doctor. No, I'm fine. I got this. No, Bill, I think you should go. Listen, he's going to get away. Bill.
We got this.
Yeah.
It's a flesh wound. Your arm's off.
Who are you, Bill? I'm Batman.
She turned me into a newt.
I'm just going to say this to the audience because I don't think I think half of this or more is trolley because they know us, but the other half, I'm seeing a lot of people who are asking something that was answered by the very first thing I said in the show that we've hit on a couple times. If it's a simple thing like how do I do kung fu in my game? Well, that's fighting. You drill down and pick something that that establishes it. When we're talking about something that needs savaging, take a look at something that's a little more, out there. Mad Max is a great example because, yeah, you could say it's all about driving, but those cars do a lot of specialty stuff, and you have to be able to come up with the rules for that. Now, we've done an entire multi-part, multi-show thing on Mad Max. I don't necessarily want to go down that particular rabbit hole, but I think that where you really need to look at these conversions is when a simple skill application or trapping application doesn't solve the problem.
I'm going to give you some examples, okay? All right. For Who Framed Roger Rabbit, heroes never die. You drop anvils on him, you hit him with a car, Roger takes bumps and bruises, he might be shaken, but then he bounces back.
Yeah, you can say the tunes never take wounds.
Yeah,
or they basically have. Okay, so what you're talking about is basically a character, Dustin, who has the invulnerability, power or bestial trait.
Monstrous ability.
Monstrous ability. Thank you. Oh my God, words hard. But they also have weakness, acetone.
Right.
So the only time they take wounds is from acetone. Otherwise, you hit him all day long with anvils and everything, and they can be shaken, and that's it.
Well, and I think there's an aspect to this that, once you start down that path, you're going to find that you're going to do a lot more with just your trappings and a single skill or two. But the fun is laying out something that you really don't know how to do and then figuring out what to do with it. And I think the problem is that the half measure version of that is a lot of people trying to do stuff like, well, how do I do kung fu? Well, okay, it's really simple, but you're overthinking it. And you're going to make something way more complex than you need. You need that ability to take that step back and go, well, wait a minute. Is there a faster, more furious way to do this? And a great example of that is if you take what Dustin just said, you're going to do Roger Rabbit and you're going to apply Heroes Never Die. I would say that's absolutely perfect so long as the character is attuned. But if you're playing a human in Roger Rabbit, then I would say you need to use that rule out of Shane Tar that lets you convert wounds to fatigue at the end of combat.
Right.
Because the character has kind of the same effect, but they're still in a lot more actual physical danger when an anvil drops on their head. They can die much easier than a cartoon can.
Right.
So that's where you really have to apply more of that. Well, how do I actually capture that? Well, here's two different rules that apply to two different types of characters in the game.
Right. And the thing we were talking about earlier with trappings is don't approach it from, okay, I need to come up with my own new homebrew setting rule. Stop. Flip through the rules, familiarize yourself, and go, what is here already that does that mechanically? And then use it.
I was just asked the other day how to handle a mass battle where it wasn't equal sides, where you didn't have an army on both sides. It was just 5-player characters and an army on the other side. And I was like, well, you can't really use mass battles because how do you determine the number of tokens to award per player character? It doesn't really work. You're losing tokens, but you're not losing characters. Plus, your characters are kind of getting double hit by that because they're actually taking wounds during this, but they're also losing tokens that represent their capacity. And I said, well, it's simple. You run a dramatic task, and in between the card draws to the dramatic task, you run a single round or two of combat. Just real quick, and this guy runs up to you, give me a combat. Next card draw, here's the moment everybody gets their the combined action roll to see how much damage they do, and knocking down the things for the dramatic task. Another little combat, and it's a different player that gets challenged each time there's a combat, or it's a different combination of players. That way you keep that dramatic edge to it, but it also has that dramatic task to make it feel like they're fighting a large swath of people, so they get the combat payoff, but they also get that bigger, more dramatic moment payoff in the same scene using two existing mechanics.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, Dave. That's an interesting way to do it. I was gonna say, for the people that keep asking about martial arts, how to do it in a setting, use high adventure, and also award bennies at the end of combat, so that people will be able to spend those bennies to get the combat edges.
Well, let's think about that for a second. Not to shit on the idea, not to shit on the point, but
okay.
It's handled. It's called martial artists. There's an edge.
Right.
I don't understand. Maybe I'm not understanding. Are we talking like Dragon Ball Z style martial arts where it's super ultra special? If that's the case,
Dragon Ball Z is just superpowers. And in fact, that's probably like heavy hitter or cosmic level. Dragon Ball Z is ridiculous. I'm saying that if you go to the setting rule section and you look up high adventure, what happens is that players in a high adventure setting get to make use of a combat edge if they spend a Benny. All right. Give everybody the martial arts edge. You're playing in a martial arts game. Everybody gets the martial arts edge. Now, to sort of get that whole Jean-Claude Van Damme cinematic 80s montage feel, high adventure and bennies for complications and at the end of combat, because now your players would be like, well, I can't do this, but I'm going to spend a benny and now I can. And you know how he'll just like magically pull something out of the air? He's running with a high adventure setting.
I don't necessarily disagree. I'm not a fan of the high adventure setting rule, and I'm going to tell you why. And here's why: it tends to slow down gameplay, because now you got to go. Wait, do I have the proper? Wait, I could spend a benny to get an edge. That's an edge requirement for the edge. And
then I have to look up the edge.
Yeah, it could break.
The edge does.
So what I would say is, if you're talking about your characters in your world are martial artist badasses, and everybody else is their kung fu is weak, then all you do is only the wild cards can have the martial artist edge. If you want to amp it up a little bit, then take a page out of Deadlands and say, hey, martial artist is now its own arcane background based on the superpower and superpower's arcane background. That way you give everybody a little bit of specialization for their style of martial arts, but only wild cards. You can only take the martial artist edge to get the arcane background martial artist, and now it becomes a power based thing where your kung fu is fast, it's furious, because it's built on the power system instead of it. I like I'm saying, I'm not saying what you're saying, Dustin, is not is it valid. It absolutely is. You could absolutely do it that way, but my own preference is it slows the game down, because there's all those permutations in that setting rule.
I see your point, and sunlight is the best disinfectant. So yeah, you're right. It would slow things down.
Slow your roll before you admit defeat, Dustin.
I'm not admitting defeat. I'm just admitting that I see a point.
Russ in chat points out it only slows it down if they wait until it's their own turn to then look this stuff up.
That's very true.
The counter is a deal.
The counter is how good your players are determines how well some setting rules work. A setting rule like high adventure really requires everyone at the table to have a more than cursory knowledge of Savage Worlds and know,
True.
Hey, can I drop a Benny to get that edge, or do I not meet the other requirements for it, and things like that. So I think there's merit to it, but it's one of those, as a GM, you have to not just determine does it fit your setting, but does it also fit the players you have in the game you're going to capture. Again, this goes back to the whole, what do I need to grab to make this a fun game? What do I need to leave out of it because it just doesn't work?
Right.
But with that said, I think before Chris turns into a pumpkin here at the end of the hour, we should touch on Sunset Sam's question about if we've ever hit a genre that worked in Savage Worlds, because they all do, but didn't work as well as we wanted or didn't do the genre justice.
All right, I'm going to go last because I have a very definitive answer.
I think he's asking for a GM horror story for each of us about not capturing the genre we wanted to play.
Superpowers for me. I just don't think I run superpowers well. I don't like running superpowers stuff. So, I mean, that would be mine. I didn't do the genre justice because I don't care for running it. I mean, I tried to run Necessary Evil and quickly decided that it was time to switch to something else.
And that could be as much that Savage Worlds doesn't do it well for your group as it is just your narrative understanding of that setting.
Right.
You might have a great idea of what you wanted to capture, but Savage Worlds doesn't capture it the way you want to for that. You know,
right.
It doesn't capture your vision.
How about you, Dave?
See, I mean, the first thing that jumps to mind is not entirely fair because it's ETU. I've had so many false starts and failures to capture the tone and genre in ETU that always stands out to me as like, where did Savage Worlds fail me? It absolutely was ETU. And it was more because I couldn't get the players on board with playing a darker, grimmer horror game. They all wanted to play Scooby-Doo, whereas I was trying to play Buffy or even, Supernatural.
Right.
But I think if I had to go with like a true, like, where did the genre break down? I would have to say that for me, it was when I tried to run vehicle combat in pretty much anything that Savage Worlds just doesn't capture that well. It's the reason that when I did like my Battletech conversions and the other stuff, I've had to go in and kind of retool how vehicles work in Savage Worlds for my games because it just, everyone gets bogged down on like, hey, how many degrees can I turn before I have to make a skill roll, and how fast was I going and calculate, did I accelerate this turn or last turn, and am I at my top speed already? It's such a convoluted mess that it really kind of breaks that moment.
All right. Dustin.
I haven't really come across one. I am going to be running a one-shot soon of Necropolis 2350, but I'm having to update it a lot. I don't know if you... So, Wiggy, everybody loves Wiggy, but he did kind of stop updating at a certain point.
Yep.
And while I love his work, I'm so used to like, I'm like pulling stuff. And to be honest with you, guys, if it comes down to it, I'm probably going to be lifting a lot from Rippers Resurrected and from Deadlands Reloaded. But, yeah, no, I haven't come across a genre yet, and I think that's possibly because a lot of the times I sort of pull my characters in with goofy NPCs so they don't notice that I'm flubbing up the rules. But I think like if you're quick on your feet, you can actually pull a narrative and get people tangled up. But probably a war setting. I'm gonna say like the most trouble I've had right now is a war setting.
So let me ask this before Jared gives us the definitive answer. Then for both Chris and Dustin, because I know for myself it's true. Is it more a failure as a GM to either run it or to capture the right feel rather than Savage Worlds failing you and leaving you kind of flapping in the wind because Savage Worlds did something?
It's not Savage Worlds. It's not Savage Worlds issue.
It's entirely an ID10T error. Error between table and
it's just not a genre that I'm into, not a genre that I like, not a genre I have a lot of
Guys,
love for.
Vehicles are monsters in the vehicle rules. I'm just going to go ahead and confess it. I treat a vehicle like a character. I give it 4d6 run die, and I give it heavy armor, and that's that. I say, okay, you are your character is wearing a really big suit and can just run really fast right now. I don't even try to make, because it's relative. That's the thing. It's you got to think in terms of relativity. A car that has the acceleration, it won't even be on the board. Its pace is just quadrupled, and you just roll to see. I mean, even a Fiat is deadly to a human being. Just don't even mess around with it.
Well, unless you're playing Die Hard, and then you can run take down a helicopter or a twin jet, or whatever you want. Here's my definitive answer to this, and it's because I'm a huge fanboy of the genre, and I love George Romero zombie apocalypse survival horror. Now, when War of the Dead came out from, I think it's Daring Entertainment, as a zombie apocalypse setting, the likes of The Walking Dead, majorly excited, picked it up, ran it, and went, this doesn't feel like a survival horror game. This feels like
Zombieland.
Zombie Punch. It just doesn't there's no, so to that end, that's why we have Dead End. I'm gonna just put it at that point right now. Savage Worlds needs to be, for my taste and my level of depravity, when we're talking about a survival horror game, I need to turn those knobs for lethality way up in Savage Worlds.
Wait. So you mean that in Savage Worlds I don't just automatically die when I fail a dramatic task?
Right. So let me share. I'll share, and we'll close it down with that. So
Chris, I think, has one more point he wants to touch
on. Okay, go ahead.
I just have to address Jeff Jones up top real quick. Go right. Cubs, go.
Okay, awesome. I'll throw one in too real quick then too. Sam, absolutely, Tron could be awesome in Savage Worlds.
Yeah.
Easily done. So Dead End, I'm using gritty damage from Realms of Cthulhu, which is about the darkest setting you can get. And even that has dials for, hey, let's not play it so gritty. Let's not press the shit out of players. We're talking about a Cthulhu.
It's a setting rule. It's a setting rule that comes with setting rules, folks. Right. I'm just saying.
That's where it goes. Listen, damage is a little bit different. You may want to let players know that they're not going to be spending bennies to soak wounds. They get one free vigor roll, and the best result they can get is a temporary injury, and they keep their wounds. That's the best result they can get.
Yeah. The worst is you take one wound and immediately die.
Right. You can, and David said this before about Dead End. You can literally die from a paper cut in that session, in that game, or tripping and falling and breaking your ankle. You could end up dead. So, applying that tone and what we're talking about. So, if you take a look at dramatic tasks in Savage Worlds, it will tell you when you fail a complication, you fail the dramatic task. If you fail to get 5 net successes over that term, you fail the dramatic task. And it tells you the worst possible thing should really happen. So if you're running a Cthulhu thing and it's the professor trying to quote this thing to put an elder god coming in and consuming the world, when he fails that dramatic task, goodbye. Everybody's dead. So we recently had a game Friday night where a player character, I won't go into a lot of detail, but they got mired in the woods and ended up the person they were with died, came back as a zombie, but they couldn't just leave the body behind. They felt an obligation to bring it back and drag it 8 miles through the woods with a bunch of heavy loaded equipment they were all carrying. So dramatic task vigor roll, failed the complication, automatically eaten alive by zombies. No, give me a roll for this. It's just narrated. Nope. Here's what happens. Your zombie buffet. So that's what we're talking about when applying even the basic rules for Savage Worlds to fit the tone of whatever it is you're adapting. So, with that said, remember, it really comes down to trappings and how you paint or skin the existing rules for the setting that you're running. It really comes down to that.
If you really want to increase your capacity as a GM, pick a setting that you don't think you can run without a bunch of setting rules and run a one-shot in that setting with just the core rules, and then try to make up the difference with your trappings, your narrative, with the tone you set, with the tasks you put in front of the players, instead of relying on setting rules. Once you do that a couple of times, you'll start seeing where does a setting rule help and where does a setting rule kind of hinder. And that makes it easier to write up your own setting rules and make those conversion choices. But you have to have that. This goes back to that whole play it a few times rules as written to understand it. Force yourself to do a rules as written play as an experienced GM that is difficult to do.
Yep. And let's demonstrate trappings for the who's at home that may not be aware. When we're talking about trappings, take a look at the equipment guide in core rules. Look at the ranged weapons table. If you see that they have the same range, damage, and rate of fire, cross it out and tell me how many guns you have left. Because they pretty much are all 12, 24, 48 range, 2d6 damage. Like almost every pistol in there has the same mechanical impact on the game. So feel free. Machete's a short sword. Knock yourself out. Lightsaber's a chainsaw. Go ahead. It's the same thing. You don't need to sit down and tinker down to the specifics of this weapon is it does this. No. Remember, you're building a weapon for Savage Worlds, and it's really about trappings more than anything else. It's how you describe what it looks like and what it is, not what it actually is. So on that note, until next time, this is Jared, Savage Daddy Gunning, for Chris, Dave, and Dustin, saying keep rolling, stay savage.